On the evening of Friday, August 7th, 2026, a fire ignited west of Summerland, British Columbia. By the following morning, it had consumed roughly 9,500 hectares, nearly 95 square kilometers of forest, hillside, and community edge. At its peak intensity, officials recorded growth of approximately 1,000 hectares in a single hour. To put that in terms you can hold, 1,000 hectares in 60 minutes is 17 hectares every minute. That is larger than 20 football pitches, every 60 seconds disappearing into flame. This is the Bald Range Wildfire. This is British Columbia, August 2026. Walk with me. The Okanagan region of British Columbia sits in a dry interior valley. Lake towns, orchards, pine forest, and hillsides that turn golden in summer. Summerland is a community of approximately 12,000 people on the western shore of Okanagan Lake. Peachland sits just to the north. These are not remote outposts. These are lived-in towns, full of homes and families and history. The Bald Range fire ignited on Friday evening. Within hours, it had already run approximately 15 kilometers toward the lake. By the time most residents woke on Saturday morning, the fire had nearly doubled overnight. British Columbia Wildfire Service Operations Director Cliff Chapman used one word to describe the conditions: explosive. The fire was classified at rank 5 to 6 on the Canadian Fire Behavior Scale. Rank 6 is the maximum. It means a fire that is effectively uncontrollable under any conditions, producing its own weather, generating lightning, and behaving in ways that cannot be safely predicted. Premier David Eby, relaying what fire officials had told him directly, described it this way: like a bomb going off. Flames in 100-foot trees, another 200 feet of fire above that. A column of heat so intense it altered the atmosphere around it. By Saturday morning, over 20,000 people had been ordered to leave their homes. The entire town of Summerland, all 12,000 residents, received a full evacuation order overnight. Approximately 8,000 people in and around Peachland received the same. Eric Thompson, the Chief Administrative Officer of the Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen, had to abandon the Emergency Operations Center and evacuate his own family. He described the Bald Range fire as one of the quickest moving and fastest growing fires the region had ever seen. Highway 97, the main corridor connecting Peachland and Penticton, the spine of the southern Okanagan, was closed. Communities that depend on that road for everything were cut off. When roads close in a fast-moving fire, evacuation by air becomes the only option. 18 aircraft were deployed to rescue people who could no longer leave by road. More than 50 people were airlifted to safety as the fire cut off access routes. These were not statistics in a briefing. These were individuals and families who had stayed too long, or whose roads had closed faster than the evacuation order had reached them, or who had no vehicle, or who had simply run out of time. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police opened an investigation into a possible death near Summerland. That investigation was ongoing at the time of reporting. Structure loss was confirmed as significant. The exact count of homes and buildings destroyed could not be released because the fire was still actively burning through the affected area. The zone could not yet be safely entered for assessment. The Bald Range fire did something that fire scientists call pyroconvection. It generated its own weather system. When a wildfire burns with sufficient intensity, the heat column it produces rises high enough into the atmosphere to form clouds, pyrocumulus clouds, that can generate lightning, erratic wind shifts, and downbursts. Those wind shifts feed the fire from new angles. The lightning can start new fires kilometers away from the perimeter. The fire becomes, in a real operational sense, self-reinforcing. This is not new science. Fire scientists have documented pyroconvective behavior with increasing frequency over the past 2 decades. What is new is the regularity with which ordinary landscape fires are now reaching the intensity required to trigger it. The southern interior of British Columbia was described in a provincial drought bulletin issued around August 6, 2026, as extremely dry. The snowpack, the mountain water reserve that slowly releases moisture into the landscape through spring and summer, had been below normal. The soil held almost nothing in reserve. The forest was ready. The Bald Range Fire was not the only fire burning in British Columbia on that weekend. Approximately 100 wildfires were active across the province. Nearly half were out of control. The 2026 season had already recorded more than 880 fire starts in British Columbia, with over 3,300 square kilometers burned across the province by early August. Approximately 1,500 firefighters were on the line. International crews had been deployed from Mexico, Australia, France, and New Zealand. Wildfire scientist Mike Flanagan, speaking to CBC, warned that the 2026 season was likely to continue into September and possibly beyond, driven by an El Niño-influenced warm, dry pattern that showed no sign of breaking. Named complexes elsewhere in BC, Pearl Lake near Clinton, Bradley Creek in the Okanagan, Brunswick near Boston Bar, together accounted for roughly 1,900 square kilometers of additional burnt area before the Bald Range event. British Columbia was burning on multiple fronts simultaneously. The Bald Range was the most visible point on a much larger map. The fires did not stay in British Columbia. Across Canada in 2026, approximately 9.9 million acres had burned by the time the Okanagan emergency escalated, a figure reported by the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre and cited in international coverage from ABC News. In mid-July 2026, before the Bald Range fire, the BBC reported 955 active fires burning nationally across Canada. That same week, wildfire smoke from Canadian fires pushed air quality in Toronto, New York City, and Washington, D.C. into hazardous ranges. Cities that had seen this before in 2023 were seeing it again. The pattern from 2023, which many had hoped was an extreme outlier, had repeated. The smoke from a forest burning in Western Canada became the air that millions of people in North American cities were breathing. School outdoor activities were cancelled. People with respiratory conditions were advised to stay indoors. There are no borders in the atmosphere. There never were. Here is what the numbers mean when you hold them together. A single fire, the Bald Range, August 2026, consumed 9,500 hectares in under 24 hours, forced 20,000 people from their homes overnight, required aircraft rescues when roads failed, and generated its own weather system. Meanwhile, across Canada, nearly 10 million acres had already burned in a single season. International fire crews had been deployed from 4 continents. A provincial state of emergency had been declared, and the season was not over. The forests burning are not just landscape. They are carbon stored over centuries. When they burn, that carbon returns to the atmosphere, accelerating the warming that makes the next fire season more extreme. The cycle is not hypothetical. It is already measured, already documented, already in progress. Save Our Planet is not a slogan designed for posters. It is an accurate description of what the science says we must do and what the fire season of 2026 makes impossible to argue with. Protecting forests matters. Reducing emissions matters. Supporting the communities rebuilding in the ash matters. Demanding that the people who make policy treat verified scientific data as a mandate for action. That matters most of all. The children who will live through the fire seasons of 2040 and 2050 are already alive. What they inherit is being decided right now. The Bald Range fire will eventually be contained. The evacuees will return, some to homes still standing, some to foundations and ash. British Columbia will replant. Communities will rebuild. The forest over decades will begin to grow again. But this is August 2026. And the season is not over. The drought bulletin is still in effect. The snowpack numbers for next spring are already being projected. The conditions that produce this fire are not conditions that have passed. They are conditions that are building. We are not watching the aftermath of something that has already happened. We are watching the early chapters of something that is still being written. And one of the few remaining variables is what we choose to do next. If this story made you stop, subscribe, and tell me, which wild place on this planet would you choose to protect?